So, good evening, commissioners and budget committee members. So we'll just give it a few minutes because we only have 5 members of the committee in attendance, so we need one more for a quorum.
While we're waiting, Budget Committee Chair Bolin, Ms. Angie and Clerk Moss, when we get to, before we finish on public comment, I have a question that I want to ask. So just giving you a heads up. And hopefully I'll remember.
Chair, we will ensure we prompt you. So Clerk Moss, I'm looking for you to help make sure I remember that as well.
All right. Welcome, Commissioner Rogers. So, Madam Chair, we do now have a quorum of 6, so I will hand it over to you, Administrator Angie.
I'm not sure if you meant Budget Committee Chair Karen Bolin or me.
Well, it's going by the slide deck, so I was gonna give it to Chair Bolin to hand it off to Tanya. So, Chair Bolin, over to you. Chair Bolin, are you with us? Can you unmute? Chair Bolin, are you there? Looks like she's having some difficulty unmuting. So let me just try and take a moment and work with that. So, Mr. Angie, if you want to go ahead.
Well, let's just take a minute. I think technology can be troubling for all of us, and let's just grant grace because we all have technical difficulties from time to time. And there I see her. So, Clerk Moss, would you like to start again, please?
Yes, I can, Madam Administrator. Welcome to the Budget Committee members. We'll just do a quick roll call for the recording purposes. So, Commissioner Rogers. Okay, see you there. Commissioner Treese.
Here.
Commissioner Fye.
Oh, I'm here.
All right. Vice Chair Willie.
Here.
Chair Harrington.
Here.
Chair Bolin.
Here.
I do not see our other committee members on it, so we have a quorum of 6 members for right now. So to you, Chair Bolin.
Okay. So, could you remind me where our agenda is? We're going to call the meeting to order, and we're going to hear from our county administrator to start us off.
Thank you, Ms. Bolin, and thank you everyone being here on our second budget committee evening together. Next slide, please. And I would ask that we have language interpretation instructions by our interpreter. Victor? And I don't see Victor on, or is that occurring simultaneously? Okay,
Sí, muy buenas. Tenemos interpretación disponible para esta sesión. Si se une por medio de su computadora, en la parte de abajo va a haber un icono de globo y ahí va a presionar, haga clic ahí y puede elegir el idioma inglés o español. Si está ingresando por un dispositivo móvil, va a haber 3 puntos. En esos 3 puntos va a haber otro menú y de ahí va a oprimir la opción Interpretation Language o en lenguaje de idiomas y de ahí puede seleccionar español. Si tiene alguna duda, alguna pregunta, por favor notifíquenos y con mucho gusto le podemos asistir. For those of you who are needing interpretation, we have interpretation in Spanish. So at the bottom of your screen, there will be a globe icon as shown on the screen. And please select English or Spanish, the language that you prefer. If you're joining us through a device, a mobile device, there will be 3 dots. And from there will be another menu. And from that menu, you can select language interpretation and English or Spanish. If you have any questions, please let us know and we'll do our best to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. And I just want to express appreciation for ongoing support from our ASL interpreter and our Spanish interpretation services. So thank you for being here. Next slide, please. And I believe, Mr. Rhodes, I'm turning over the agenda to you at this time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And welcome to night 2 of our continued discussion on the county budget presentation. At the end of the county budget presentation, we will begin a process of public input, followed by a short intermission, and then we will move into the service district lighting number 1, or SDL1, as we'll refer to it. At the end of that presentation, again, taking public comment, and then we'll review the next steps in the process. Next slide, please. As we've mentioned before, we welcome community input throughout this process, and we're providing an opportunity after each of the presentations for that community input. And in the event that you have a question or comment in advance of the any of the meetings or after the meetings, we encourage you to email us at the email address here on the slide. And we will post those answers as they come in. Next slide. So we'll begin the budget process or budget discussions at this time, if that's all right, Chair Boland.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Next slide. So on Monday, May 9th, we talked about general government, and just a reminder that we have broken this presentation material down in by functional area. We did cover the general government, public safety and justice, and land use and transportation on May 9th. On tonight, May 12th, we will discuss housing, health and human services, culture, education and recreation, non-departmental, capital, and non-operating. Upon the completion of the county budget presentations, again, we will seek public input and then move into SDL1. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our Assistant County Administrator, Marnie, to begin the presentation of housing, health, and human services.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Good evening, everyone. As Mr. Rhodes said, I am Marnie Kyle. I'm one of the Assistant County Administrators. Tonight, I will share highlights from the proposed budget for housing, health, and human services. This functional area is complex, and it includes the Office of Community Development, the Housing Services Department, and Health and Human Services. Housing and health and human services, including community development, are intertwined, critical aspects of our community's ability to successfully live, work, and play in Washington County. Our collective health and human services program serves vulnerable children, people with physical and developmental disability, older adults, people who are houseless, and those experiencing mental health and/or addiction challenges. Affordable, stability, quality, and accessible housing all play a vital role in our community's health. The collective vision is a community that is safe, healthy, supported, and where equity is centered in all aspects of our programming. This is accomplished by creating and delivering programs and services that support community members throughout their lifespan. We educate people through public health efforts, provide safety to vulnerable children and adults, address addiction, and enable people to live independently and provide that affordable housing. These are just a few examples of how our work is accomplished. Our programs are prioritizing historically underserved populations that have been disproportionately impacted by inequities in the system of care. So as you can see from this slide, there is an overall 10% increase in revenue for these programs. Much of that increase is from the voter-approved Metro Supportive Housing Bond and some increases from our state funding for public health modernization. FTE is increased to support affordable housing, supportive housing, and public health modernization. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with Health and Human Services. This is a very large and robust department comprised of the following major offices and divisions: administrative services, solid waste and recycling, animal services, including the Bonnie L. Hayes Animal Shelter, disability, aging, and veteran services, behavioral health, developmental disabilities, and public health. HHS has 447 FTE and has requested an additional 9 grant-funded positions in FY 22-23, which will bring the total to 456 FTE. So I'm going to go through just a few changes in some of our programs. So solid waste and recycling is included in the public health budget. This program received an additional $160,000 in new grant funding from Metro, and will use those funds to support local commercial businesses with implementation of the required Metro commercial food scrap program. And then public health. Public health's primary responsibility is to support the Board of County Commissioners in their capacity as the local public health authority. This includes assuring that our communities like schools, businesses, and restaurants remain in compliance by enforcing public health laws, including Oregon administrative rules, the disease investigation guidelines, and local ordinances. The Public Health Division also is responsible for other essential public health services that are categorized by 3 broad areas: assessment, policy development, and assurance. And all of this centers equity. The Public Health Division received national accreditation since 2017. Revenues decrease about $1 million, primarily due to a decrease in license and permit fees and delayed implementation of the tobacco retail licensure fees. Expenditures also decrease about $855,000 or 3%, and the general fund subsidy increases about $156,000 or again about 3%. The state public health modernization funding approved by the legislature in 2017 is supporting new work that began in 2022 and continues into FY23. And some of that includes developing a climate and health action plan, improving disease prevention and control, and public health leadership and communication functions. I'll move on to behavioral health. The behavioral health budgets are another very large, complex set of programs and funding streams. As the community mental health program, Washington County's behavioral health services are responsible for assuring behavioral health safety net services are available to all, including outpatient and inpatient services for people with severe and persistent mental illness, older adults, children, and youth. The safety net also includes substance abuse disorder treatment services and gambling prevention and treatment. The community mental health program is also responsible to provide crisis services, such as those provided by LifeWorks Northwest at the Hawthorne Walk-In Center, our mobile and phone crisis services, and in partnership with our Sheriff's Office and local police departments, the Mental Health Crisis Team. Other important roles within the division include care coordination and case management, which is funded by the coordinated care organizations for Medicaid clients, and supportive housing services developed in partnership with our community-based organization and housing services. Historically, this fund has had a significant fund balance. However, this year you'll notice that the fund balance is projected to be significantly reduced in the coming years, really related to increased administrative costs and decreased interest revenue as the division spends much of its reserves on capital investments. Speaking of important capital investments, since 2019, the Behavioral Health Division, in partnership with community members and stakeholders, has been developing a concept to increase substance use treatment services in our community. The Center for Addiction Triage and Treatment, affectionately known as CAT, is visioned to be a place where community members will have rapid access to different levels of care and support for substance use disorders. The CAT is proposed to be created using a split campus model that houses two main services. A grouping of the first is the Community Services Campus. This is a grouping of co-located community-based services and supports like healthcare, outpatient behavioral health treatment, peer drop-in services, crisis support, housing navigation, and our county behavioral health staff will be there. The other campus is the Intensive Services Campus, a grouping of CAT services that includes sobering, withdrawal management, residential treatment, assessment and triage, and peer stabilization. The county is in the process of finalizing the purchase of the Intensive Services Campus building and has included funds in this proposed budget for purchase and renovation of a second building, or the Community Services building that I discussed. One of the things that you'll notice is that investments in the Tri-County Risk Reserve, or Fund 207-7086, this is the organizational unit that's responsible for the implementation of the Behavioral Health Resource Network. And this is what will develop and ultimately operate the Center for Addiction Triage and Treatment. Intergovernmental revenues increase in this fund due to new Measure 110 grant funding for substance use treatment and recovery services. The interdepartmental revenues increase due to transfer of balances in Oregon Health Plan Unit, the Health Share of Oregon Unit, and all of this is to consolidate appropriations into a single fund to support the capital development and operation of the CAT, the Center for Addiction Triage and Treatment. So one more thing before we leave behavioral health, I just want it to be on your radar. One last trend that we're watching is related to the behavioral health workforce. Over the past year, community-based behavioral health organizations have seen a significant decrease in their capacity to support community members due to escalating workforce shortages. Providers cite high turnover as typical, but the turnover rate has increased from 20 to 25% in an average year to over 45% in the past year. This is compounded by clinicians who are deciding to leave community mental health altogether, which has impacted our agency's ability to rehire vacant positions. The current issue is not isolated to our community behavioral health agencies. It's also an issue that other behavioral health agencies, local hospitals, and the state are reporting this difficulty in our community behavioral health workforce. And then the final highlight in Health and Human Services is the Developmental Disabilities Program. The Developmental Disabilities Program is the state designated Community Developmental Disabilities Program. The program has grown significantly since 2013 due to changes in eligibility requirements that were set by the legislature. The program serves nearly 2,000 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities every year. The Community Developmental Disability Program is responsible for system oversight of foster care licensing, eligibility determination, and protective services. In addition, we provide service coordination and case management for individuals. Service coordination and case management is what we use to connect people to needed services within the community. The program continues to be underfunded by the state funding allocation. It is currently funded at approximately 88% of the cost based on the state recommended staffing levels. The county is adding the equivalent of 1 FTE in caseload every 2 months. So that's putting a lot of strain on our workforce. The program did add 3 FTE in 2021-22 and is requesting an additional 4 FTE in this proposed budget. This will reduce the carry forward to $924,000 in that program. Next slide, please. So we're moving on to the Office of Community Development. Their mission is to support people in vulnerable or marginalized communities and those with low incomes through services, facilities, affordable housing, and neighborhood revitalization projects. The budget presented this year is reflective of this mission by funding activities that cover housing, rehabilitation, economic opportunities, homeless recovery services, anti-poverty programming, and neighborhood revitalization. In our budget this year, we're requesting funds to carry out the fair housing testing in rental properties. This is an action called for in our analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. So Housing Production Opportunity Fund. The county created the Housing Production Opportunity Fund in fiscal year 2016-17 with general fund resources. This fund was created to allow completion of multifamily affordable housing projects that experience gaps in funding due to unforeseen circumstances, such as construction cost increases, changes to tax credit financing, loss of other sources of funding, and those kind of unexpected problems. In FY 2019-2020, the board approved adding $20 million over 5 years to further these goals and expand policy guidelines to provide aid for affordable multi-housing assistance, a home ownership program, and innovative special needs housing programs. The carry forward from previous fiscal years is sufficient to fund anticipated gap needs based on the estimated pipeline of current projects in development. The program was originally intended to receive $4 million in general funds for each year of 5 years. The program will be extended 1 year, so the original commitment of $20 million general fund dollars from the Board of Commissioners is honored. Home. So Office of Community Development manages the home program on behalf of the county and its 12 city home consortium members. Home funds are used throughout the county to finance the development of affordable housing, including rental housing, new construction, acquisition and or rehabilitation, and home ownership. In fiscal year 22-23, 2 large developments will be funded. The Tigard Senior Housing Project, which is new construction of 58 units of affordable housing for seniors, and Bellevue Woods is a rehab of 64 units of affordable housing. Both will begin construction this year. And then the final program that I'll talk about in Office of Community Development is the Wood Stove Exchange Program. The Wood Stove Exchange Program provides grants and rebates to eligible households to replace older wood stoves that contribute to higher levels of air pollution. This program has operated in partnership with the Department of Health and Human Services relative to air quality in the region. The funds are used to support the reduction of wood smoke particulate and associated harmful pollutants and gases that enter the atmosphere. The funds also provide general public awareness and outreach regarding health impacts of wood smoke, particulate, and education about cleaner burning methods. This program has been funded by private and public support, as well as prior year general fund resources since it began in July of 2016. The project has a fund balance of almost $608,000, which consists of funds not expended from prior years. There are no violated. A non-attainment designation is serious for any community. It means the air is unhealthy and that EPA will impose stricter emission control requirements on new industrial development and potentially also on existing industry. The additional restrictions can deter development and investment in the region and reflects the negative health impacts of PM 2.5 that can put the community at risk. So next slide. We're moving on to housing services.
Miss Kyle, can I interject just one moment for the committee member Paul Lathrop has joined. So now you have 7 members. So sorry for that. Back
Thank
to
you.
Ms. Kyle.
Thank you. So housing services. The Department of Housing Services manages county and housing authority programs. The housing authority programs are managed under the terms of an intergovernmental agreement between the county and the authority. The Department of Housing Services provides a continuum of affordable housing options that promotes community strengths. Services include short and long-term rental assistance, helping individuals and families achieve housing stability, homeless services, and helping people move into shelters or supportive housing. Also, in partnership with Health and Human Services, the Office of Community Development, and countless community partners, we provide housing outreach and navigation, education, and connect people to other services, including workforce development, mental health, and substance abuse treatment. In order to be relevant and effective in a rapidly changing and increasingly diverse environment, the Department of Housing Services is committed to principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion for all members of our community. I'm going to talk about first the Metro Affordable Housing Bond and then supportive housing services. As we all know, housing affordability is a critical issue for many Washington County residents. Through the passage of the Regional Metro Affordable Housing Bond in 2018, a goal was set to develop over 1,300 permanently affordable housing units throughout the county within 7 years. Currently, 1,257 affordable housing units and 14 affordable housing developments are in pre-development and or under construction within Washington County in partnership with the cities of Hillsborough and Beaverton, something to celebrate. In collaboration with public and private partners, Washington County is increasing the inventory of affordable housing using the Metro Affordable Housing Bond. The county uses the Metro Bond, the county funding, and other federal funding like low-income housing tax credits to accomplish these goals. Partners include the Housing Authority, Washington County, local jurisdiction, nonprofits, and private developers. Washington County specifically received $116,465,532 in Metro Affordable Housing Bond allocation to fund the development of 814 affordable housing units outside of Beaverton and Hillsborough. A notice of funding availability for $80 million was released in 2021 to support the development of affordable rental housing. Washington County's first project, the Viewfinder, finished construction in December of 2021. 9 additional projects are in Washington County's pipeline, with 5 of those under construction, 2 scheduled to begin construction in the next couple of months, and 2 others to begin construction in the first quarter of 2023. So I'll move on to supportive housing services. Supportive housing services measure was approved by voters in May of 2020 to fund permanent housing and services in order to meet the needs of a growing homeless population. Tax revenues provided approximately $38 million in the first year of the program, and we expect to receive this budget. The proposed revenue that we expect to receive is $50 million in the next fiscal year to provide shelters, permanent housing, and create a system of care to deliver those essential supportive housing services. In the first several months of programming, Washington County added over 100 year-round shelter beds and 187 winter shelter beds. Staff were able to stand up emergency weather shelter system, which served 88 individuals during very dangerous weather events. In addition, 18 service provider contracts were signed, including 5 culturally specific organizations, which were funded with additional capacity building grants. The regional long-term rent assistance program has housed 186 households with nearly another 295 who have received subsidies and services and are currently searching. Next slide. Like many departments, offices, and programs, Housing, Health, and Human Services proposed budget includes supports for ongoing training, education, and support of equity, inclusion, and diversity, as well as funds that support our bilingual staff and translation of materials distributed to the public. In the HHS proposed budget, this includes continuation of a limited duration senior program coordinator to assist that division in meeting their EDI goals and contract deliverables, as well as to ensure full support and participation in the countywide EDI work. In addition, several programs are continuing or will start in 2023 with a specific focus on reducing health equity. Our equity work is accomplished through co-creation and by intentionally funding that's distributed to trusted culturally specific organizations. And I just wanted to provide a few quick examples. So one that you're probably pretty familiar with is our COVID response and recovery work, where we've provided health education while assisting with resource navigation specific for Somali immigrants and refugees, increased access to culturally specific food for Pacific Islanders and Asian communities, provided economic support for families impacted by COVID with an emphasis on supporting Black, African American, and Latinx families, supporting people in isolation with rent, utilities, food, and information to really help prevent the spread of disease. And we've utilized community health workers to increase health literacy and improve vaccination rates for the Latino population within Washington County. So another program, Promotores Ambientales Volunteers. The Promotores Ambientales, or Environmental Promoters program, was coordinated by the Solid Waste and Recycling Division. It's the realization of a community-based education program envisioned by a group of passionate community members. Participants receive culturally appropriate training in sustainability and materials management, and in turn, they share their knowledge with friends, families, and neighbors. They're recognized for their efforts through outreach stipends. The Promotores Ambientales program recently graduated its 3rd cohort of mainly monolingual Spanish-speaking community members from across the county. Collectively, this fiscal year alone, participants have conducted over 600 hours of outreach activities in low-income areas and among communities of colors, those who we know are most impacted by climate change. And a final example is the Healthy Birth Initiative. This is a culturally responsive service model for Black, African American, and African families. This holistic and well-established evidence-based approach expands social, emotional, and clinical supports for perinatal families, pregnant families. The primary components of the program include a wide range of individual and family-centered home visiting services, community-based training, workforce development, and outreach and community engagement. The Healthy Birth Initiative has proven maternal wellness and improved birth outcomes, decreasing infant mortality, low birth weight, and premature deaths. So those are just a few examples of our the equity work that Housing, Health, and Human Services has been participating in. And with that, I believe I will turn it back over to Mr. Rhodes or Chair Bolin.
Chair Brolin, we are on slide 13 of the presentation material, and with your permission, we'll open it up for questions.
I think that'd be great. Questions from the community? And are
Yeah.
they doing an email or a
Chair Bolin, you were on questions from the Budget Committee on this
budget
section.
committee? Okay, got it.
So, Chair Harrington, you were up first.
Thank you. I'm a little confused and I'm hoping you can help me. When we were on slide 9, there was summary information about the number of FTE that were increasing, I assumed, across the entire Housing, Health, and Human Services domain.
No.
What I'm looking at in hard copy form is the proposed budget on page 176.
Right, so on slide 9, the increase in FTE that I was referring to there is just in Health and Human Services. And it is related to the new grant funding under Public Health Modernization within Health and Human Services.
Okay, so I'm correct that for Housing, Health, and Human Services, the total number of FTE increase is in fact the 3410.
So the total FTE increase for Housing, Health, and Human Services, I will get back to you with that exact number.
Okay, because we do not have a summary page that reflects just Health and Human Services. So
I
that's,
think slide 8. But I don't think it gives it, you're correct.
Okay.
It doesn't give a complete FTE, so I can get that to you.
no, I'm following you now. I get it. Since it was titled the same, I assumed we were still talking about all Housing, Health, and Human Services versus just a subset. So now I follow you.
Okay, yes, 34.10 is total for all of Health and Human Services.
Yep. So similarly, on slide 11, I think. No, sorry, it was back to slide 9. I was correct in what I noted down. I thought I heard you say that developmental disabilities was increasing by 4 FTE. But when I looked on page 189 to follow, it says 6.5. So I just noticed those differences, and that's why I just wanted to ask about that. So if you could just note that, and I'll come back to it later, that'll be
Yes.
fine.
Thank you, yes.
Thank
Commissioner
you, that's all
Rogers?
I had.
The chair kind of got cut off there at the end. Did she get her answer there? Maybe
I
she
said
did.
that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Oh, okay. It was cut right there. All right. Marnie, and this is a general question, not just on this budget, but in the future, and maybe you want to do a memo to the board separate, but it's no secret that we're struggling with balancing budget resources against expenditures. We talked about that at the first meeting. I think Tanya's done her best to take a look at where we come up with that 30 million. I don't think it's going to be 10 like Rodney said. I think it's going to be much more this coming year. And yet you're adding positions. your budget is fairly flat, and that's what I got out of that. And a lot of that's that federal ARPA money and CARES money that you continue to use. Do you have a plan? And I'm less concerned about this year than I am about 2 and 3 years out. Do you have a plan and how you're going to ratchet this back? Because you, with inflation soaring, I don't think you adjusted anything for what's going to happen in wage increases. And I don't think we've really thought through what's going to happen when the federal government and state government starts to wrench down in terms of revenues that they're going to be able to distribute. This is, we've had our kind of our glory days, golden days, in my opinion, and it's going to get much, much tougher. So my questions are, one, do you have a plan? Two, is that readily available so we can look at it and see what you're going to do when you don't have all the federal and state money? And three, is it really smart to be adding all these positions when you know that we're going to have significant issues in years, not this coming year, but in maybe 2, 3, 4. So bunch of theoretical.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. These are good questions. So one, and I can get more detailed information to you, but one is Housing, Health and Human Services not adding any general fund supported positions. All of the positions we're adding are 100% special fund supported, and that includes the DD positions, the positions in permanent supportive housing, affordable housing. The public health positions are public health modernization funding. The fund,
Can I stop you, Marty? Marty, can I know that? And I know what an excellent job you and Tanya and others do. I don't doubt that, but we all know that it's very hard for government to cut positions once added. So these are special funds that you got that aren't probably going to continue. So do you have a plan? Not, some plan that says, yeah, I got the funds. This isn't general money. I get that. Yeah, when the funds aren't there, what is your strategic plan to deal with positions that aren't being funded? Mm-hmm. And again, this may be too much for tonight, so you can bring it back later, but that's my concern and been my concern.
Yeah, I can provide a more detailed answer, but we do have a plan. But I also wanted to say that all of the COVID funding has been moved into Fund 155, so it's not included in the HHS budget as it was in previous cycles. And I can't remember if that, I think that's on our agenda for later tonight.
Ms. Kyle, let me add, Commissioner Rogers, Budget Committee Member Rogers, we will provide that accounting. We do in our budget are very clear to align positions with their revenue source, specifically for the COVID Relief Fund, the American Rescue Plan Fund. Those positions were hired as limited duration positions. So that is at the time of hire, at the time of posting, and that's clearly known through our HR processes, and those employees know that as well. When those funds are exhausted, those positions do go away. As the Board of Commissioners does start to plan for ARPA Tranche 2, based on board direction that we've been given, having that clear plan of how, knowing that there's not going to be an ARPA 3 of federal relief funds, that we need to ensure that we have a plan to continue to keep our community safe, and also to have a sustainable budget too, and not have what I will call a cliff effect.
Commissioner Willie.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, changing gears just a little bit, Marnie on page 176 is a recap, of course, of Health and Human Services. And the top line is Community Development Block Grant. And it looks like that program is being cut by $3.7 million. And I just want to make sure that we emphasize that that is not the case. And please refer everyone over to page 186 to see what is causing that reduction in revenues. And so we all love CDBG money. And so I just want to make sure that anyone who's reading this understands that that program is not being cut. It's just, again, a different funding source, and it's kind of difficult to follow all this stuff because there's money moving all over the place, but I just want to emphasize that. And then the other program that's kind of, that I love is this air quality, which is on page 218 and 219. And the reason why is because I happened to be mayor when DEQ came to the county and to the city of Hillsborough and said, we have a problem. And so subsequently, this program was initiated. I think it's very important that we emphasize the fact that we use gain share money to fund this program. What I'd really like to hear, and I don't expect this tonight, but I'd really like to know up to now how many wood stoves that is emitting all this bad pollution, how many of those we have replaced, and what our budget, not dollars wise, but how we're going to go about continuing these programs. Because in many cases, these wood stoves are in the housing of some of our elderly that can't afford to have heating sources other than wood. So we need to make sure that we give them the most update and efficient wood stoves. And it certainly helps them, and it certainly helps our environment. So just if you could provide me with a little bit of a report on that, maybe it's certainly not tonight, but sometime in the future.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. That's perfect timing because we are finalizing our quarterly report on the wood stove exchange program. And so that will be ready to share very shortly, but I can get you a quick answer on the number that we've exchanged and the impact to the positive impact that's had on air quality.
Chair Bolin, I do not see any other hands raised at this time for you.
Okay, so now the next part of our presentation is going to be culture, education, and recreation. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Budget Committee members. I'm Rachel Fuller, Assistant County Administrator. If you're following along in the printed version, we're starting on page 221. And this slide shows the various service areas in the functional area of culture, education, and recreation. As you can see, libraries is the largest program within this functional area. Next slide. Washington County Cooperative Library Services, or WCCLS, provides funding, infrastructure, and support services to link the libraries in Washington County into a county-wide public library system. This partnership between the county, 9 cities, and 3 nonprofits has been in place since 1976. WCCLS also directly operates the West Slope Community Library. 60% of the funding for Cooperative Library Services and West Slope Community Library comes from the County General Fund, and 40% of the funding comes from a local operating levy approved by the voters. WCCLS equips libraries with services like the extensive countywide materials circulation system, cataloging, logistics, digital acquisitions and licensing, network and IT services, training and project management, outreach services to county community partners, marketing and communications. The fiscal year 22-23 budget funds an organizational assessment. Once complete, WCCLS will begin a multi-year process in collaboration with partner agencies to analyze the cooperative's funding and governance model. Equity investments for WCCLS include new expenditures of nearly $188,000 to provide interpretation and translation support for libraries, provide the catalog interface in more languages, and increase costs of additional graphic design in more languages. WCCLS is requiring member libraries to be in compliance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act with regards to limited English proficiency, and the budget funds this significant investment. Next slide, please. Now that all COVID-19 restrictions related to event venues have been eliminated, events are returning to the Wingspan and Fair Complex. Like other departments, Westside Commons and its customers continue to see impacts from the pandemic, including staff shortages, supply and supply chain issues, and other non-COVID related issues such as higher fuel prices and inflation. The fiscal year 22-23 budget funds an assessment of the ongoing impact to Westside Commons from the pandemic and identifies any key business changes that need to be made to continue to adapt business operations and the business model. In fiscal year 22-23, staff will begin development of a capital improvement plan using the master plan approved by the board in 2019. The Oregon legislature recently passed House Bill 5006, allocating $10 million in grant funds to be used for capital projects on fairgrounds in the state. A capital improvement plan will help prepare for this potential funding and also establish a foundation for strategic capital conversations, including funding of capital. Planning is underway for the 2022 Washington County Fair, taking place July 22nd through July 30th, 2022. And finally, staff is collaborating with the Washington County Visitors Association, WCVA, on a sales and marketing strategy for Westside Commons and have begun a review of the Wingspan business plan and booking policy. The project will include benchmarking similar facilities and an assessment of operations. These reviews and assessments would provide a foundation for board discussion regarding the vision of the facility and any operational and functional changes to be considered. Next slide, please. Washington County maintains 3 parks, including Scoggins Valley Park or Hag Lake, Eagle Landing Park, and Metzger Park. The general fund contribution to parks declines this year due primarily to anticipated increases in revenue from parking pass sales, reservation fees, and paddlecraft rentals at Scoggins Valley Park. Additionally, Washington County is eligible for approximately $3.2 million in funding from the Regional Metro Parks Bond. As required by the bond criteria and consistent with county equity policies, any projects funded with bond dollars would involve significant community engagement, including the opportunity for community to influence and co-create amenities in projects. The proposed budget maintains funding for Oregon Extension Services. We have worked with OSU to reduce the request consistent with given the county's budget situation, and this will be reflected in a budget adjustment. Next slide. And here is where we're available for questions.
Questions from the committee members?
Commissioner Willie?
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. That was good information. I just want to make sure that again, I'm looking on page 233, and it shows the annual county fair increasing by $705,000. I just want to make sure that we are clear that the county fair has obviously endured through this pandemic where we didn't have a fair in 2020. We had our first 10-day fair in 21. and was kind of not as complete a fair as I think you're going to see in 2022. So what is reflected there is primarily from the increase in transit lodging tax, which there is a percentage allocated specifically to the fair. And so that's where most of that money, that increase in revenues there, is going to come from. So Leah has put together a great budget for this, submitted that to the Fair Board, of course, and is putting together another phenomenal 10-day fair coming up in July. So I just want to make sure that we are communicating that the TLT is increasing, and that's what's going to provide the revenues for that fair. So just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Chair Harrington.
Thank you. And thank you for the information on page 234. I think that helps address Commissioner Willie's concerns. My question is on parks. So looking at page 224, I was really glad to hear you remind me that there are 3 properties, Scoggins, Eagles Landing, and Metzger Park. So I am assuming on page 224 that even though the budget analysis talks primarily about Scoggins, that this page is about all 3 parks, and that I'm trying to make sure the information on page 226 and 227 is that in addition to what's on 224, or is it a subset of 224?
Thank you very much for the question. And I'm actually hoping that one of the budget analysts might be able to help me here so that or the CFO, so that I can confirm how it rolls up, because we also have the Metzger Park LID. So
yeah. And it may be that 226 is just with regard to the LID portion.
So Chair Harrington, could I ask one of the budget analysts to get me that information, and then I will send it to you? Thank you very much.
Okay,
Appreciate
that's
that.
Great. That was the only question I had. Thank you. I'm all set for now.
Chair Bolin, I don't see any additional hands.
Okay, so now thank you for your presentation. We appreciate it. Moving on to non-departmental functional area.
Great, and I'll continue tonight.
Okay.
We are on page 240.
Okay.
This next category includes expenditures related to county memberships and direct investments to community-based organizations, along with general fund contingency. General fund contingency increases this year and in the proposed budget because of reductions made to bring the budget into balance. The increase was needed to stabilize the 5-year forecast and keep within current budget policy. Next slide, please. Expenditures include county membership dues, professional services, services provided by other organizations, and contributions to other agencies. County memberships include the Association of Oregon Counties, the National Association of Counties, the West Side Transportation Alliance, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, and a new membership this year, Oregon Latinos in Local Government. Next slide, please. During the fiscal year 21-22 budget process, the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement was tasked with clarifying the process Washington County uses to determine its investment of discretionary dollars in community organizations. This year focused on clarification of the purpose of these investments and improved alignment of organizations. Staff will begin a thoughtful, equitable process for determining investments in fiscal year 23-24. The proposed budget includes a 5% cut to contributions to community organizations. And the list of organizations is provided on page 246 of the budget document. Next slide, I'm happy to take questions.
Chair Bolin, I am not seeing any commissioners raise their hands or unmute. Oh,
So
Commissioner
can I ask-
Rogers.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I should raise the electronic, but I'd asked Tanya for some information, and what it was is a list of the organizations and how with our constrained budget, what we were going to do in the future. And she supplied some information about approximately 5% cut on a lot of them. Some things are going up because of their nature, but a lot of them are taking a cut. Rachel, I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about that, or if Tanya. It's good information for this group.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Yes, the list, and I may have said the wrong page, is on 246. And the community, we have a straight 5% cut down at the bottom. That would be applied equitably to the community organizations. So that would not apply to the various associations and counties, the county dues, but it would apply to the community organizations in that chart.
And then Budget Committee Rogers, the Board of Commissioners has heard presentations previously from our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, Latricia Tillman, on a new process that we will be putting in place for next year, which does put more of a competitive grant process in place. That development of what that process is still underway. So the Board of Commissioners will be receiving further information.
Chair Bolin, you had a question, and then to Commissioner Fye.
Well, I was just going to comment on page 243. It looks like there's a lot of stuff going away, but then in the analysis, it looks like it just got moved around. So I can't quite tell if we're spending less or just moving it around.
Committee Chair Bolin, thank you for that question. This year focused on aligning those organizations within a certain category. And so it really is both. We have moved some, and in some areas we will be spending less.
So a combination, sounds like.
A combination.
All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Fye?
Sorry, I'm gonna pass.
Okay. All right. Not seeing any additional hands. Chair Bolin.
Okay, so our next topic looks like it will be transportation facilities and technology capital.
Yes, thank you. And if you're following along, we are now on page 248. So next slide, please. Great. A couple of items to note regarding facilities and technology capital. First, you'll notice that the Wingspan and Event Conference Center does not have any funding for 22-23. This project is complete and remains in our budget document only for historical reference. General fund contributions for capital in both facilities and information technology were frozen this year, consistent with the budget guidance provided by the county administrator. Next slide, please. So this budget does minimize capital spending, and departments are reprioritizing projects using existing funds and fund balance. As Marnie mentioned, the most significant project in the facilities budget is the Center for Addiction Triage and Treatment. And the increase you see in the facilities budget is due primarily to expenditures related to this project. In IT, staff recently launched an IT Steering and Governance Committee. The IT Governance Committee is a cross-departmental team tasked by the county administrator with making recommendations for a portfolio of projects to be delivered by IT. This initiative takes a one Washington County approach to IT projects and is a best practice in the industry. In her budget message, County Administrator Angie mentioned some of the challenges with our existing finance and HR systems, also called our Enterprise Resource Planning System, or ERP system. These systems are antiquated and need to be replaced. The budget funds some pre-planning efforts for this project, including identifying the scope and the financial scope of magnitude. This is exciting because it's an opportunity to modernize our technology systems and also to improve our internal processes. I'm going to turn it over to Erin to talk about the emergency communications system improvements.
Next slide. Good evening, Budget Committee. If you're following along, I'm on page 262 and 263. The Emergency Communications Systems Fund accounts for the proceeds from the general obligation bond that was approved by voters in 2016 for the Emergency Communications Systems project. Essentially, the Emergency Communications System receives and dispatches 911 calls to all law enforcement, fire and rescue, and ambulance service providers countywide, and provides the radio system for responder communication. This project entails the upgrade and capital costs of facilities, infrastructure, and equipment that convert the existing 911 system to the current technology, improves coverage by installing more towers, builds in resiliency and redundancy to ensure that facilities can withstand emergencies, and replaces about 3,000 analog radios. This fiscal year will be the 7th and likely the final year as we near project completion. And then, as Ms. Fuller mentioned a few slides back, the Wingspan and Event Center was mentioned, but in terms of the capital project, it is complete. And this slide shows a picture of it lit up in the evening. Next slide. I think back to Rachel.
Back to me. And before I move into transportation capital, I did get the answer to your question, Chair Harrington. Page 224 is just general fund parks, and 226 is only for Metzger Park. So they are separate budgets. Okay, moving forward on transportation capital. As described in the budget message, the Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program, known as MSTIP, is funded through the county's general fund. This year, revenue increases due to one-time transfers from the city of Hillsborough and from utilities for utility work completed in conjunction with road capital projects. Also included in transportation capital are capital projects funded with gas tax revenue and transportation development tax. The fiscal year, next slide, please. The fiscal year 22-23 budget includes a general fund transfer of $34,599,000 to the MSTIP program for road construction and appropriates $166,622,000 for transportation projects currently in various stages of planning, design, permitting, and construction. This includes 43 projects located throughout the county. These projects were chosen in partnership with cities and the community. Significant projects underway for fiscal year 22-23 include Tualatin, Sherwood, and Roy Rogers Roads. 3 projects are underway at the same time. Cornelius Pass Road, including improvements on TV Highway. 209th Avenue at TV Highway. Century Boulevard at TV Highway. Martin Road at Highway 47, a roundabout there, and River Road at Farmington Road roundabout. Revenue in the Road Capital Projects Fund comes from a variety of sources, including gas tax. Incremental increases in gas tax have provided a small amount of new funding for small capital projects, including sidewalks, bike ped improvements, and ADA. And these projects are all captured in this fund. Projects expected to begin construction in fiscal year 22-23 include Hag Lake Slide Repair, Gales Creek Thatcher Road intersection, several curb ramp improvements for accessibility, sidewalk infill projects, including pedestrian crossing and access to transit projects, and intelligent transportation system improvements, including Cornelius Pass Road advanced traffic signals system. Next slide, please. Be happy to answer questions.
Commissioner Rogers?
Sure. In the presentation, I don't know, was you, Rachel, last time, or whether it was Tanya, but the mention was made, and we all know it. The misstep was an original program. It was a option levy that got extended and then rolled in when we had the old Measure 5 issues, and it became a permanent part of our base. There's always been a commitment, and this board a couple of 3 years ago did it again, but it's always been a commitment that this would be used for road funds. But I think, Tanya, when you brought it up, and rightly so, that's something that needs to be affirmed from time to time. And I would hope it would continue, but that's my personal thought. My question is, what did you envision, or what is envisioned in terms of any budget committee involvement or discussion of that, or is it going strictly to the board? And what time periods and when do you think that needs to be done so that there's a clear policy statement?
Thank you for that question, Committee Member Rogers. Those really are significant policy questions. This budget maintains the MSTIP transfer, but I think what you are asking, if I'm hearing you right, is affirming the role of the county with regards to the planning, construction, and maintenance of roads. There's also another policy question there regarding the county's strategy for funding and potentially financing transportation investments. So we would certainly schedule a board workshop to discuss those. Again, those are significant policy questions.
And just to add to that, the financing strategy is a follow-up conversation, Commissioner Budget Committee Rogers, to your request to discuss, should we be bonding or should we continue pay as you go? So these are significant, as Ms. Fuller said, conversations that we need to get the board's input on. And from a staff perspective, we know that our cities do rely on the county's participation in continued improvements to our transportation system.
Not seeing any additional hands or unmutes. Chair Bolin.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to the presentation on the non-operating work area, I guess.
Thank you, Chair Boland. I believe that this is on page 250. This starts on page 250 of your presentation material. I'm working off of the online slides, so, but I've tried to keep up, and I think it's page 250.
Excuse me,
Actually,
Mr. Rhodes.
it's 277.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was way off. Sorry about that.
I have a question that is actually before the last discussion, and I'm sorry I didn't ask it at the time. May I ask it now, or would you like me to wait till the end?
Now is good.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Fuller, I'm looking at the allocation of funds for different groups, and I don't see where our allocation to chambers, to organizations like Westside Economic Alliance shows up. Can you tell me where it might be? And
Yes.
it might be embedded in those numbers, but I just wasn't sure.
It is in there. Let me find the page for you.
Miscellaneous
Committee
memberships.
member,
Is
committee
it-
member Trees.
I saw it.
And Ms. Boland, were you looking at page 243? I didn't see miscellaneous memberships there.
I'm under
there it is.
246.
There it is.
246. Okay.
243, there's miscellaneous membership dues.
And I have various association, county dues. I guess that's different. Okay. 246 is what I was looking at.
And my history makes me ask that question.
And thank you. And if I could, let me find that in the budget. We did move some of those around. And so let me find the page number and I'll pop back in.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And sorry to stop the flow here. So back to you, Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Want to move on to the last functional area for the county budget for the discussion this evening. The non-operating, as I mentioned during the orientation process, these are funds that do not have employees, but are really special in nature with regard to some of the either internal operations, things like debt service payments, insurance payments, replacement and reserve funds for things like ITS, facilities, fleet maintenance. And you'll notice in the pie chart, the miscellaneous category. Those are general fund transfers to other funds within the county to support either to subsidize or to support the operations as we as Ms. Fuller a little bit more about that as we get in. Next slide, please. So the debt service funds, this is fairly straightforward, but they are debt service obligations for county issued debts. In 2016, we had general obligation bonds that were issued. Those were voter approved bonds for the replacement and upgrade of our 911 system. We also had in 2016 a issuance of full faith and credit obligations to fund various county initiatives that are listed here. And those payments are funded through a combination of gain share, TLT, and general fund property taxes. And then finally, miscellaneous debt. This is 2006 debt issuances that were refunded in 2013 and 2016, and the debt service obligations for those issuances. Next slide. The county does operate a number of insurance funds. Much like most businesses, we have for liability and casualty insurance, life insurance, workers' compensation, medical insurance, and the like. Next slide. The reserve and replacement, as I mentioned, we have funds set up for major facilities related equipment replacement, IT services, and fleet maintenance. And the intent of these funds is to really smooth out those large dollar costs that come with things like roof replacements, the HVAC systems, IT, new systems, implementations and upgrades, fleet maintenance replacements. We have a fleet maintenance replacement schedule that we work off of. But as I said, these funds help to fund those types of replacements. Next slide, please. And then finally, the miscellaneous. As I mentioned, these are the general fund transfers to subsidize other funds operations or to fund operations. And I'll give you just a couple of examples. Ms. Fuller mentioned MISTIP. We do transfer those dollars from the general fund to the MISTIP fund, the library system fund, for example, those debt service funds that I mentioned, as well as the community corrections fund, as an example. These are transfers that occur to the community corrections funds to fund those misdemeanor related cases that are not reimbursed by the state. For a full list of the general fund transfers, you can refer to page 299 of your budget document, or for the electronic document, page 335. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Chair Bolin, it does not look like any members have any questions for you on this slide.
So I did have one question. On page 278, it shows the biggest increase of 38% under building equipment replacement. So we're adding $11 million to building equipment replacement. Is there a reason for that?
Chair Bolin, if you don't mind, I will get an answer for you, and we'll include that in our responses if that's okay.
Okay, I didn't see it in the description, so that's why I asked.
No problem.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So we're ready to move on. So the presentation component is complete, and now it's time for, I guess, the community to make their comments and concerns known. So I guess we open up the floor. How will we receive those comments?
So Chair Bolin, I will first ask if any members of the public want to provide the oral testimony to you, and then I will turn it over to Mr. Rhodes to follow up the questions we've received by email for you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Would any members of the public like to provide testimony to the Budget Committee for up to 2 minutes? Please utilize the raise hand function. It looks like we have one hand here. All right. Benton Johnson, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Let's go ahead.
I have just questions. Good evening, commissioners and Budget Committee. I really appreciate your work, but I just have some questions, general questions about tax revenue on property tax. Do the affordable housing projects go on the property tax rolls, or do they get a tax break? That's one question. How much has the property tax revenue increased over the past 5 years? And what is the expected property tax revenue increase for all the new housing and commercial construction taking place in Washington County over the next 5 years? Those are my questions.
Thank you very much, sir. And we will note those questions. And as I mentioned earlier, we are creating a master list of questions and answers, and those will be included on that list and provided out to the public.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you,
It also, Mr. Rhodes, it may also be helpful to highlight budget print pages 334 and 335.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Would any other members of the public wish to provide testimony at this time to the Budget Committee? Not seeing any other hands, Chair Bolin. Over to you, Mr. Rhodes. Oh, Chair Harrington?
Thank you. This was the time when I wanted to share a couple of things relative to public input. And that is that we received a letter on March 7th from the from the Washington County Public Health Advisory Council that might be useful to note in the record, as well as a letter from the Committee for Community Involvement, which was in our constituent report of April 22nd with regard to some budget increases requests. And then lastly, we received a letter from the Community Housing Fund Executive Director on April 11th, 2022, that covered multiple subjects, but in addition, information about the Housing Production Opportunity Fund. So given that this is the budget public comment, I wanted to make sure that I brought forward those three items, which had gone originally to the Board of Commissioners. That's all.
Committee Chair Bolin and Committee Member Harrington, we will pull those from the constituent report and add that to our Q&A so that all Budget Committee members have the benefit of seeing that information.
That'd be great. Thank you.
And Chair Bolin, that concludes the county budget presentations for this evening. If it is the committee's direction, we'll be happy to take a brief intermission and come back in 10 minutes for the SDL 1 presentation.
Okay. So 10 minutes, so come back at 7:10.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Moss, could you please promote the other sign language interpreter to a panelist?
Yes, I will take care of that.
Thank you.
Chair Bolin, it is 7:10.
All right, are we ready to go? So just to clarify, this next, is it just on the special district lighting? What about the other special districts?
Those will be covered in the meetings next week.
Okay.
So this will just be the SDL 1 for this evening.
Okay. So moving on to, we're having a presentation then on the special districts. I had pages 318, 319 in our printed booklet.
And Clerk Moss, if you could elevate Stephen, I'd like to hand off to Stephen to introduce his staff, and then we'll get into the presentation if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Rhodes, and he should be joining momentarily.
Great.
Good evening, Budget Committee members and commissioners. I'm Stephen Roberts. I'm the Director of Land Use and Transportation. We're going to cover tonight the Service District for Lighting Number 1 budget. And making the presentation tonight are a couple of staff members from Land Use and Transportation who actually do the administration of the district. I have Sheila Giambroni, our Senior Administrative Services Manager, joining us, and Stacia Sheeler. Stacia is our SDL Program Coordinator for the department. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Sheila. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm pleased to have an opportunity to provide you with a brief overview of the district, including the proposed budget for fiscal year 22-23. Next slide. On this map, all SDL areas are shown in orange. The urban growth boundary is outlined in the darker gray area, with the cities in light gray. The Service District for Lighting is a special service district that provides street lighting services for many of the streets in areas of Washington County outside of cities. It funds nearly 13,000 street lights, benefiting over 47,000 properties. Street lighting is required for new developments and can be provided in existing neighborhoods with the majority support from benefited property owners. Individual SDL assessment areas are created to apportion the cost of street lighting service across the benefited properties. There are currently 1,263 SDL assessment areas. SDL charges are assessed and collected to the annual property tax bill for all properties located within the SDL assessment area. The Department of Land Use and Transportation staff provide administrative support to the district. This includes helping developers and community members establish new SDL assessment areas to fund ongoing maintenance and power costs for streetlights. Property owners may also petition for streetlights in existing neighborhoods, which we'll discuss later in this presentation. We can move to the next. Thank you. As noted, there are currently 12,691 streetlights in the district. The energy and maintenance costs for lights within the district are paid for by the 47,360 lots. Most areas pay approximately $20 to $30 per lot annually, but the decorative lighting in the North Bethany area, those residents pay a slightly higher rate for their lighting than most of the district. When an SDL is formed, a minimum and maximum cost per lot is determined. The maximum cost is currently calculated as double the minimum cost. Older assessment areas were not calculated in this manner. However, if the cost is going to exceed the approved maximum amount at any point, property owners are notified by mail and a public hearing is required. We currently have 1,260 active assessment areas. There were several developments within North Bethany not included in our annual rate setting this fiscal year, or excuse me, last fiscal year. Those areas will be assessed this fiscal year. The SDL budget for fiscal year 22-23 remains consistent with previous budget years. Materials and services account for 66% of expenditures, primarily the utility costs for the streetlights. Interfund expenditures account for staff charges to support the district. the district's portion of countywide and road fund indirect costs, as well as an investment in information technology services, as the district will receive a data software update to manage our street lighting assets and rate setting processes. The district maintains a fund balance contingency to cover 4.5 months of expenditures until property tax payments start arriving in assessment and taxation. As previously noted, the SDL assessments are included on the property tax statements. Next slide. The bar graph shown reflects a 3% increase in revenues and a 1% decrease in expenditures. The increase in revenues is due to the addition of new tax lots in the district. The decrease in expenditures is due to the LED conversion project and the savings in energy costs. The average monthly rate for PGE utilities has decreased with the recent conversions, approximately 2%. As noted previously, remaining expenses include staff support for the district, indirect costs, and a new asset management system. I expect the district budget to remain fairly flat going forward as we continue to recognize the substantial savings in energy costs due to the conversion of a large part of the district lighting to LED fixtures. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stacia Sheeler.
Good evening. Next slide, please. Here's a quick recap of where we are with the LED conversion project. Over 11,300 lights were installed or have been converted to LED. The remaining 1,200 plus fixtures will be converted in the coming fiscal year. Those are the acorn style lighting that remain. PGE is currently working through some equipment shortages for several different light fixtures, poles, transformer parts, etc. Property owners may continue to see slight changes as new fixtures are used and older fixtures are phased out or unavailable. Even though we have added several new assessment areas, we have recognized a decrease in the monthly utility bills due to the savings in energy cost for the LED fixtures. On average, we are saving approximately $5,000 a month in utility cost at this time. Next slide, please. Neighborhoods can request lighting be added to their area, and when a request is received, we find out if the requester is willing to become our neighborhood contact. PGE reviews the area to find out if it's possible to add lighting to existing poles, verifies the potential location of lighting, and prepares a cost estimate. A petition is sent to all residents with the information, and if over 50% sign in favor, we move on to get board approval to set a public hearing and move through the agenda process. Area lights are sometimes a better option if someone requests lighting but doesn't want to work with their neighbors or go through the long process. An area light costs approximately $10 a year, and it's installed by PGE. We have only had 2 requests for those lights this year. PGE has been directing people to Amazon to purchase their own lights and install them themselves at no monthly charge. Shields can be requested by a property owner, but are installed at the property owner's expense. The cost is $150 per shield to cover crew time to install them. And this is PGE crew time. We have seen a large increase in the number of shield requests with the LED conversions. Unfortunately, the newer light shields are caps placed over the area where the LED bulbs are housed. They don't block the light like the older eyelid type, if you will. The LED lights have less backlight and uplight than the older fixtures, but appear brighter when someone looks directly at the light. Once we explain the benefits of the conversion, most callers decide they might not need a shield after all. There are still a few that go through with the shield installation, and we are working diligently with PGE to find solutions to help where we can. Next slide, please. We recently held a public hearing, and the board approved moving ahead with the area of Southwest 107 and Southwest Hawthorne Lane, east of Highway 217, north of Southwest Walker, to add 20 lights in that affects 87 tax lots. We've received 48 signed petitions, which was 55% in favor of the additional lighting. We will continue working with the constituents to find ways to add lighting to areas with existing poles. We've had several requests for lighting most recently. We are currently working with County Council to update our SDL ordinances, required forms, and processes to move things forward. And the next slide is any questions?
Thank you, ladies. That was very helpful.
Commissioner Willie?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I just think it's important to note that there is no contribution from the general fund on these. These are self-sustaining, and these service district lightings are a great way to, I think, provide safety and lighting to these neighborhoods, and at no cost to the county. So I hope I'm correct in that, but I really like these service district lighting budgets.
You are correct. Thank you.
I don't see any additional hands, Chair Bolin.
Okay, so I guess that concludes our presentation. Thank you again, ladies. Next up is community input. This is specifically for the service district for lighting, not anything else. Is that correct? Or is it open to everything?
It is just on the service district for lighting.
Okay. So any community, do you see anyone wanting to?
Members of the public that are online, do you wish to provide public testimony on the service district for lighting section? Give you just a moment to raise your hand. Not seeing any hands, Chair Bolin.
Okay. So it looks like according to our agenda, we're ready to move on to next steps. So does that go to Mr. Rhodes?
I think there was an additional hand raised, Chair Bolin. So,
okay.
Benton Johnson, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you for catching the hand raise. I was a little slow. I just want to say I do appreciate very much the lighting in my area, which I have to pay for. Thank you. I just have a question. If I report a light out, do I report it to LUT or to the power and light? That's the question.
Is Stephen still with us?
Yes. Stacia, do you want to take that one actually? Do we have Stacia? Okay. I think it's always safe to report to Washington County, and if we don't own the light or if we're not the right entity, we're happy to pass along the request to the appropriate party. You can do that by submitting what we call a request a service on our county road operations page, and that is at wc-roads.com, or you can also reach us by phone at 503-846-ROAD. That's 7623, I believe.
Thank you. In the past, I have reported it on the poll number, and they have usually a thing to report things, and they say they'll get around to it on their next maintenance, whatever. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Back to you, Chair Bolin.
Okay, so if there's no additional community input, then we go back to Mr. Rhodes for next steps, correct?
Thank you, Chair Bolin. We do have two meetings scheduled for next week, Monday, May 16th and Thursday, May 19th, all starting at 5:30 p.m. On Monday evening, we'll cover the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District, or the ESPD. On May 19th, we will cover the Urban Road Maintenance District as well as the North Bethany Service District for roads. Next slide, please. As I mentioned on Monday, we wanted to afford the committee an opportunity, should you choose to do so, to have another meeting on May 31st, and that would be prior to the public hearings on June 1st and June 2nd. We would anticipate that this would give the committee an opportunity, if you choose, to continue deliberations and discussions of the presentations that you've heard, and We did not anticipate that we would have any public comments at this meeting, as we will be holding those public hearings on June 1st and 2nd. And then finally, the Board of County Commissioners adoption of the budget would take place on June 21st at their regularly scheduled meeting. At that meeting, we would continue to accept public testimony. So Chair Boland, at this time, I'm going to hand it back to you to see if there would be an interest in having that May 31st meeting.
So Chair Harrington, you have a comment? You're still muted.
Sorry about that. My question's on the previous slide. So maybe I'm behind the times, but I thought that we have a different set of budget committee members for those budget committee meetings, and it is a different budget committee than the Washington County Budget Committee, the Washington County and Service District for lighting budgets. So I just wanted to highlight that because Ms. Bolin and Mr. Lothrop won't need to be at those two meetings unless they want to join the public in watching them.
And Mr. Ross, wasn't there another one, Mr. Ross?
Thank you for clarifying that, Committee Member Harrington. And what we want to, these slides are intended to ensure that the public is on the journey through the Budget Committee dates. And so other committee members can fully tune in and watch these discussions as well.
Well, and the reason I spoke up tonight is because at our meeting on Monday, the description made it sound like it was all one budget committee involved with all of the meetings. And I just wanted to make sure that correction was made.
Thank you. That's probably my fault being the newbie. I apologize.
So Chair Bolin, to
Yes,
the
ma'am.
next slide and the question that Mr. Rhodes was asking.
So do you think we need to wait until after May 19th to decide if we need an additional meeting so that the other people can know? Okay.
Could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So this last year, we had the pleasure of having something like 19 people testify at the public hearing for the Washington County and Service District for lighting budget public hearings. This year, process-wise, we have had public comment during the process. And I wasn't sure what kind of response are we going to get. I'm thrilled that we had at least one each night, but I think it's a far cry from what we've heard thus far. So towards that end, I'm at this juncture pretty comfortable that we don't need to add a supplemental budget committee meeting as proposed for May 31st, I think it was. So I just wanted to share that as part of the conversation in trying to determine if we have that meeting or not. That's all.
Okay, so the other two lay members of the committee, is there any concern or comment that you want to make that would mean that the 31st meeting would be helpful to you as a member of the committee, other than what you've already received.
Mr. Lathrop, do you have any comments? He does not seem to be unmuting Chair Bolin. Oh, there he goes.
No comment.
No comment. Okay, and then Mr. Ross, did he come tonight?
He did not.
Okay, so it's just Paul and I. Okay, so I'm in agreement with Chair Harrington that I'm not sure that an additional meeting is necessary. So I would say let's free that time up for other things and go on to the 1st and the 2nd. Or
Very
after,
good.
of course, after those May meetings, the 16th and the 19th.
Very good. Thank you. And with that, I believe we are at the end of our meeting. Chair Bolin.
So thank you to all of our presenters tonight. Everything was very clear, and I appreciate all of your work and your skill at explaining things to us. I'm very grateful. And with that, I think we adjourn for the evening, and then I won't see you again until June 1st.
Thank you, Chair Bolin. Really
Good night, everyone.
appreciate you're doing this.
Thank you very much. Take care. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Chair Bolin.
You're welcome. Good night.